I've come to realize that I have a lot of shame for some of the decisions I've made in my life. It's hard to admit to, but I think it's important to do so. I've made decisions that have not only had a negative impact on my relationships, but also my relationship with myself. It's a strange feeling because I love myself very dearly and I'm happy that I feel that way. I want to do what's best for myself because I care for myself. Me, deserves it. And I guess that's why I get so mad at myself sometimes when I feel like I've done myself a disservice. It's almost like I'm a friend to myself in a way, and I get mad and sad when I see someone I care so much for get hurt over and over again. What I have described is the foundation of an addict's mentality, that feeling where you want to be better, do better for yourself, but simultaneously you don't. Perhaps you feel helpless to where you are, like you're not strong enough to overcome what's holding you back. And so you succumb to it over and over again. And then that brings shame, and so you cope with it by using a reliever for your shame, which just so happens to bring more shame. Lovely. And the cycle repeats itself. This is something I have definitely felt for long periods of time, and through this journey of wanting to be better, it's made me very introspective, very reflective, a lot of the actives. And so today I want to talk about addiction. I want to talk about my beliefs on where it manifests from and how I feel there are these universal elements that makes any addiction persist, regardless of the substance of choice. Also, I want to share my belief on how we help others and ourselves fight addiction, and how that, at its core, it's with empathy. So there are many ways to describe escapism, but I found this to be the best definition. Escapism: the practice of seeking distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by engaging in entertainment or engaging in fantasy. It is a way individuals detach from the day-to-day stressors and challenges of life, finding solace in activities that transport them mentally or emotionally to a different place or state of being. And I want to preface this by saying that escapism is not an inherently negative thing, the way that this video may make it sound. It is, I believe, a very neutral, natural, human thing. Like, life is inevitably going to have stressors, and therefore the desire to escape feels kind of inevitable for human nature. Escapism can look like anything, so long as it's helping someone distance themselves from their stressor. To quote our queen, Mandy Kloppers again, at its core, escapism is often a response to stress, anxiety, or dissatisfaction with one's life circumstances. These triggers can range from workplace stress, personal conflicts, to broader existential concerns. As a coping mechanism, escapism allows individuals to momentarily disconnect from the pressure and demand of life, offering mental and emotional relief. This practice can manifest in various forms, including immersing oneself in sports, engaging in creative hobbies, or even losing oneself in the corporate world or in virtual realities. Escapism can be a very healthy thing. Like, I love, after a long day, watching a movie or a show while eating a delicious and comforting takeout meal. I love engaging with art and history, going to the free museums offered in DC. I love writing and editing these YouTube videos. So the point I'm trying to make here is that escapism is a very powerful thing. Where it becomes unhealthy then is when it becomes overindulged. And so I kind of want to discuss why one might want to overindulge in escapism, because I believe that the desire to overindulge in it is how addiction persists. So let's talk about Rat Park. Rat Park refers to a series of studies on drug addiction that was conducted in the late 70s by a man named Bruce K. Alexander. So he, to me, is a pretty cool guy. He believes that medicalizing addiction has greatly reduced the power of stereotypes towards addicts. rather than just being seen as weak-willed people or literally being possessed by the devil. The medicalization of addiction has really helped to see this problem as a chemical one. But nonetheless, there is an important component to him that is being left out in the conversation, and that is the social component of addiction. He was noticing something flawed in the research exploring drug addiction in the early 20th century and in the 70s. So in these experiments, experimental rats were given the choice between either consuming diamorphine, with heroin, or just plain drinking water. And overwhelmingly, the rats would choose diamorphine almost every time and consumed it to the point of overdose and death. So at the time, these results were used to show the chemical addictiveness of heroin and cocaine. But Alexander was concerned about the fact that there was a pretty important part of the study that wasn't being factored in. And that was the condition that these rats that were overwhelmingly overdosing were in. Because these rats were always kept in small, solitary cages. And so he hypothesized that perhaps the laboratory conditions were a cause for exacerbating self-administration of these drugs. And so Rat Park began. So Rat Park was a large housing colony about 200 times the size of the standard laboratory cage. Located in Rat Park, there was plenty of food, wheels and balls for enrichment, and enough space for mating and socializing with other rats present. So in a notable experiment called the seduction experiment, rats were placed into 4 groups. 2 groups would remain in the isolated cage or Rat Park for the full period of 80 days, while the other 2 groups would be transferred from one to another after 65 days. And in both Rat Park and the isolated cages, there was the option of either self-administering diamorphine or just plain drinking water. The caged rats, whether having had been transferred or having had always been there, took to the diamorphine instantly, while rats in Rat Park, whether having had been transferred or always having had been there, resisted the diamorphine. In Rat Park, they would try it occasionally, with female rats being more likely to than male rats, but there was a statistically significant preference to the plain drinking water. The authors concluded that isolated cages, as well as the female sex, caused an increase in the consumption of diamorphine. So I feel I should say real quick that there is debate and some criticism around this study, in a few errors with its methodology to its inability to be perfectly replicated in future studies. But I think what is important for this video is that there is an overarching understanding shown in these experiments that perhaps it is our conditions that affect our willingness to find an escape. Perhaps addiction isn't just about the chemical hook, but also one's cage. Someone doesn't have to be literally in a cage to feel like they have nowhere to go, like their life can't be anything than what it is right now. I surely felt that way as a kid when I didn't know that the world could be more than it was, and I still struggle with that feeling now. And I don't think I am unique in this. So this is where escapism comes into play. And where it becomes unhealthy is when we subconsciously decide that our escape is better than the life that we are living, and therefore we overindulge in it over and over, even to the point where the consequence is we are slowly chipping away at our relationships, our self-esteem, our dreams, our goals, our life. And I think it's this kind of mentality that manifests an addiction and makes an addiction persist. And I also think that this perspective of addiction really opens the door of understanding it in a lot more of a productive way. A way that, established addiction experts have been preaching for decades now. Like it's really nothing all that new. And that is that the substance of our addiction is not the root of the problem, but rather our relationship to it. So I'm gonna hit y'all with a TED Talk, because I am a TED Talk enjoyer, and you can't stop me. It's by a man named Johann Hari, and it's titled "Everything We Know About Addiction is Wrong." And I find this video to be very fascinating and inspiring. So he talks about Rat Park and meeting Bruce Alexander. But what I want to focus on is another professor that he speaks with, Dr. Peter Donald Albert Cohen. So through Hari, we learn that Dr. Cohen believes that addiction perhaps isn't even the right word that we should be using, but rather bonding, as it better fits with human nature. You know, humans have a natural need to bond. It's rooted in our evolutionary biology. Strong social ties were our access to protection, resources, security, and subsequently our survival. We are social creatures at the end of the day. So when we are mentally healthy, generally speaking, we will bond and connect with one another. But if we can't do this, bond with one another, perhaps if we've experienced prolonged trauma, abuse, mental disorder, or have just been given a unlucky hand of cards in life, we will nonetheless be driven to bond with something that relieves our stress. And this can take the form of anything. Hari made this point quite effective when he posed a hypothetical to the audience, asking what would happen if all the water bottles in the room were actually bottles of vodka.
Totally legally, all of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk, I might after this. But we're not, right? Now, because you've been able to afford the approximately a gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk, I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love. You've got people you love. You've got healthy relationships. And a core part of addiction, I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests, is about not being able to bear to be present in your life.
Okay, bars. Speak on it, King. Go on, Hari. We are listening. And I think this point revealed a lot to me, because there isn't anything inherently wrong with drinking alcohol. Something very obvious to all of us. You know, we go out to happy hour and have a drink after work to unwind with our colleagues. We host parties and encourage our guests to bring and drink the alcohol. We crack open a cold one while watching the game. Am I right, guys? And I wouldn't describe any of these activities as inherently an addict's behavior. So, why are so many people addicted to alcohol? Well, I would argue it's their relationship to the substance. You know, the need to overindulge in the escapism aspect of alcohol. It relieves stress, blurs memories, and lowers inhibitions, and it can be very easy to abuse this element of it when we cannot bear the weight of our existence. And I understand that there are drugs that have serious chemical hooks to them. I don't want to sound like I'm ignorant and denying that reality. But I do want to point out that we do give those drugs with real chemical hooks to them, to people all of the time in perfectly legal ways. Like, diamorphine is heroin. It's actually a stronger, purer form of heroin, and it's an opioid that's given to patients all of the time. Like, it's given to patients after surgeries, given to patients when they're experiencing severe pain from cancer and its treatments. It's given to people at the end of their lives to relieve agitation and breathlessness. You know, it's given to patients after they have a heart attack. It's used in epidural infusions when people are, giving birth. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if there is a true and real chemical hook to all of these drugs, then why aren't all of these patients ending up being heroin junkies? Why, if everything works out medically, can people return to their lives without a substance abuse following them? And, well, there are a lot of answers to those questions, but I would argue that it is their relationship to the substance, or their lack of relationship. You know, like, you heal my pain, pain goes away, I pay the hospital bill, and I return home to my family, friends, job, hobbies, and my life. And we part ways. But if during that experience with diamorphine, if patients experience, you know, their anxiety going, their depression, their trauma, that relationship with the diamorphine becomes incredibly strong. That bond becomes incredibly strong. And if there isn't much after treatment to return back to, like if someone doesn't have community, if they don't have a job, if they don't have hobbies, and just all of this mental toll, well, I'd argue that a addiction to diamorphine or something to the similar effect, like heroin, becomes almost inevitable. And I think this helps me get to my point about this fallacy around the idea we have with just some substances being more dangerous than others. And I know how I sound when I say something like this. Like, I can imagine what you're thinking. Like, really, are you about to compare an addiction to heroin as something to the same level as, you know, an addiction to video games? And yes, that's exactly what I'm about to do. And I think my best example for such an argument is with the show My Strange Addiction. Like, I have a lot of qualms with the circus this show makes out of its subjects, but I think there is an underlying point proven in the show that people can cause serious harm to their lives regardless of what exactly it is they are addicted to. You know, a lot of people on this show struggle in their marriage lives, their social lives.
Addiction to teddy bears is a little bit embarrassing. Go out for a walk, she'll have the teddy bears in a stroller.
My wife thinks it's strange, but she accepts it.
A lot of them aren't employed and have experienced serious trauma or mental disorder.
It was like a 7-year struggle. I was a principal secretary. There were people that didn't like me there, and so no matter what I did, it was just a losing battle. I really find rocks comforting.
And what's interesting about this is that the substance of their addiction really never is the root of the persistence of their addiction. It's just their choice of where they put their escape. So I think my problem in all of this is that we kind of use the idea that, you know, drugs and alcohol are the most dangerous of all substances to kind of avoid getting to the real root of the problem. Like, we criminalize drugs, incarcerate people, and destroy their lives over being addicted to these substances, and then write them off as people that are just too far gone to be saved, since they've already been hooked and enslaved to the drug where there is no coming back from it once you're hooked. Like, just take a look at this ad made in the 90s by Drug Free America about cocaine.
Only one drug is so addictive, 9 out of 10 laboratory rats will use it. And use it. And use it. Until dead. It's called cocaine, and it can do the same thing to you.
It's ridiculous. I can't. And I think what pains me the most about this fallacy is that it gives a pretty good reason to avoid what I believe is the true way to help people fight their addictions, to help ourselves fight our addictions. At the very least, this is what helped me.
Yesterday, just a memory away. Does tomorrow really come?
There is a moment in the documentary Vegas Tunnels by Andrew Callahan that I really want to highlight here. In this documentary, Callahan becomes acquainted with the people that are living in the underground sewer system of Las Vegas. In this scene, he is speaking to the outreach director of a nonprofit organization, Shine a Light, that provides aid and support to the people living there, in hopes to eventually get them out. The outreach director himself was a former resident of the sewer tunnels. There is a cool moment when he is talking about the mindset that some struggling addicts have, and we watch as Callahan really takes that mindset and connects it to his own life.
Think about this. What's the biggest anxiety in your life right now?
Probably rent.
Never have to worry about that ever again. Never. Just that alone, right? Never paying a bill. You don't ever have to be anywhere ever again on time. There's a certain twisted freedom in that, right? There's a twisted freedom that you've let go of society. You've just let go. And you're living very primal, very what's next, what's next. There's not a whole lot of planning, right? All that, it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in an RV for maybe 2.5 years, and there was something sort of exhilarating about knowing that, okay, if I have this and I can pay for gas, I never have to check into a hotel, never have to pay rent, never have to check in with anyone. I can just go to a parking lot and sleep here tonight, somewhere else tomorrow night. And there is something that's like, I wouldn't even call it twisted for myself, because obviously I wasn't what they would call homeless, but you know, I still didn't have a house or an apartment or a place to go back to. I didn't have running water, didn't have showers, showering at Planet Fitness, going to different gas stations every day and surviving off beef jerky and mixed nuts. I felt like I had escaped this society's matrix or something. And I would see people going to work every day and think, thank God that's not me.
What I love about this documentary and Andrew Callahan himself is his ability to really connect with the people that he meets here. He has a really cool ability to sit in someone else's situation without any judgment. And I find it to be a very beautiful showcase of true empathy. Seeing Callahan's empathy really allowed for me to take a step into empathy and see myself in these people's situations. I guess I wasn't as scared of their reality when I saw someone else bridge that gap first. Like, sure, I have never been homeless, nor have I ever been near that point in my life, but I do understand what it's like to live in survival mode. You know, I've navigated prolonged trauma, depression, I've had death of loved ones, I'm a child of divorce, I have a learning disability, I have damaged my relationships, I've hindered my dreams, I have isolated myself for prolonged periods of time. And when I look at these people, I see a version of myself that simply did not have the resources that I did have and still do. I have a support system. I have not only my education, but also friends and family that love me dearly. And I will always be grateful for those things. You know, I have done a lot of work in bettering myself, and at the end of the day, I do deserve that credit. But nonetheless, I have to remain humble in the knowing that my privilege was a lifeline. I had things to hold on to for hope. I had things that gave me a why for wanting to be better. To go back to Johann Hari's TED Talk, he famously ends his speech with an incredibly impactful line.
Because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you.
And while I full-heartedly agree, I think this line also begs a very important question. How do we actually build that connection for others, for ourselves? And I'd argue the answer is empathy. There is this weird but incredibly common fallacy about how empathy actually coddles addicts, you know, prevents them from actually holding themselves accountable. I've heard people argue that tough love and disciplining addicts is actually the most effective way to get someone to recover, as it's somehow the only way to actually get them to be accountable for their misdoings. But I'd argue that tough love actually just entraps a person in the cycle of shame and isolation two key factors that I have argued make any addiction persist. You know, empathy is not about excusing an addict. It's not about, excusing their very true and real damage that they have done to themselves and very often their loved ones as well. You know, it doesn't tell you that you are not responsible for your behavior, but I do think it 100% creates a space where you finally feel safe to actually admit to them. I had this realization in a very interesting way. When I had a friend who was dealing with a very toxic and almost addictive relationship with someone. You know, it frustrated me to no end to see someone that I care so much about get hurt over and over again, to the point where every hangout we had, at some point they would just start crying out in frustration. But yet they would still stay, still go back for more. And it got to the point where it was even damaging our relationship. But somewhere in all of that frustration, I made a decision. You know, I was not going to hide my feelings about their partner from them. But at the same time, I made a promise to myself and to them, unspoken, that I would not leave them. Ever. I somehow knew that if I threatened my connection with them, threatened to leave them if they didn't break up with their partner, it would just put them in their toxic partner's arms all the more. I instead just wanted my friend to know that whenever they were ready to make a change, I would be standing right there next to them. I don't know. Maybe my subconscious just had this weird understanding of how my addictions have worked. Maybe I just empathized with them. And eventually, they did leave. And they are one of my closest, bestest, oldest friends to this day. And I think this situation just reinforced something in me that sticks to this day. That when someone has a why, a reason, a person to go back to, that it makes all of the difference. And I understand that this is an incredibly difficult mission to put on the family and loved ones of addicts. But I just want to pose a question right now for maybe some people who are hesitant to digest my words. Do you want this person to be better? Or are you perhaps just really angered that they're not? And there is a part to all of this that I cannot forget to mention, and that is the part where we extend this empathy also to ourselves. I remember my friend once told me that she doesn't believe in regrets. She believes that she has learned the lessons in her life when she was ready to learn them. And so therefore, she tries to not get mad at the earlier versions of herself that perhaps just weren't ready to learn these lessons. If that is not an example of self-empathy, I do not know what is. I think it is important for all of us to look at ourselves with a non-judgmental honesty. I think it requires to engage with our shame and not get angry at the person that we see back in the mirror. I think it's important to understand where those versions of yourself were coming from, why they did what they did that was so damaging, in the hopes that this will help break the cycle that has continued the shame. Kind of like how you would react to anyone that you're close to in your life that is doing something that is not what's best for them. I have spent years being mad at myself and using my addiction to escape the shame of my addictions. It was a circle. I guess I only began to break it when I decided to stop resenting her so much. I really began to get to know the insecure, shameful, self-sabotaging version of myself. I became friends with her. I began to love and care about her, because who could if I can't? I feel like I could have ended this video with some big call to action for, a policy to change, or to have some kind of law that sees addicts in a poor light be rewritten. And I hope that this video could be used by people to advance those missions, because I think they are very noble and necessary pursuits. That just wasn't the mission of this video. I think I just want people to understand that our mentalities are investments. You know, I think that what you put out into the world comes back to find you, you know, in strange but very real ways. Like, I choose kindness every day. I choose empathy and the bravery that I think it requires. I go about my life treating people with the knowledge that there is an internal goodness inside of them. There is hope in their situation, even if perhaps they aren't acquainted with it yet. And I guess I just hope that my return on investment will be that I will see myself with that same internal goodness, with that same hope. And I'd say I've turned a profit.